So first of all, thank you. We're running really late. I can't possibly make up the time, but I'm going to do these like flashcards just to plant a few thoughts. And then we're going to do our panel. We're going to cut that a little bit short. We actually talked about meeting at the bar to do the panel, so we'll see. I think our panelists are up for that. So with that, business as usual basically got us here. And what I want to touch on is how to deflect business as usual. So all the projections of scarcity assume business as usual. I refuse to accept that, and I think we should walk away with that same thought. So I want to talk about the energy, water, food nexus. You can't do anything without water, so there'll be obviously some intersection with food and energy production. So what is the nexus? We talk about it a lot, but the big deal is, well, what do we do about it? It's really more important that we move on to solutions. So you really cannot produce energy without water. So the image on the top left, that's thermoelectric power generation. You need water for cooling, for coal, oil, natural gas plants. You need water for conventional and unconventional gas and oil production. You can't do very much without water there. But what's happening is that there's innovation around how to do more with less or how to do without. And the windmills at the bottom is basically this notion of low water footprint energy production. And that's becoming really important in water scarce or water stress areas. The other side of the equation is energy for water. You really do need energy for extracting, transporting, and treating water. So again, how do you do more with less? That's a desal image in the upper right. So how do you get the energy profile down in desalination plants so you can take salt water, turn it into fresh water, take brackish water, turn it into fresh water, get it back into the supply side of the equation. There's also this move towards low energy or energy positive wastewater treatment systems. Energy is a large component of operating a wastewater treatment plant. So how do you really get that profile down as low as possible? Really great innovation happening there. And then you can't produce food without energy and water. So how does that all sort of wrap together for agricultural production, even in urban greenhouse ag systems? And a couple of things. So innovation at the nexus really happens between technology and partnerships. I actually believe that the Internet of Things, information communication technologies, has the ability to really drive innovation and for us to be more efficient and more effective with resources. And then partnerships, basically bringing people together that want to solve a set of common issues. So the scarcity trajectory, we really need more of everything. So population headed towards about 11 billion by 2050. We need 60% more food, 80% more energy, and 55% more water. Well, how is that going to happen? That's going to drive innovation, again, in technology and partnerships. Water scarcity. I'm the water guy at Deloitte, so I want to talk about water for the next few slides. Very quickly, it's having an impact. It's about a $3 billion hit this year to the California state economy. That sort of gets into the realm of real money. On a statewide basis, it has impacted China. It's impacted Brazil, estimated 1% to 2% hit to the GDP. It's impacted the private sector. So the two reports you see at the bottom, the World Economic Forum publishes their global risk report in January. The water crisis was identified as #1 in terms of impact to businesses. Then the CDP water report this past, I think 2 to 3 weeks came out. 2/3 of the companies that were surveyed identified water as a current and projected risk. The good news is about 70% of those companies also identified business opportunities with respect to water. It's a global issue. We need to stop calling it the drought and recognize that scarcity is being driven by a number of different factors, and it's not going to go away with a good rain, essentially. And all sectors are impacted. You can't do anything without water. There are certain sectors that are impacted more than others. But nevertheless, you're not making anything unless you have water. Water scarcity in 2025, this was a projection. It looks remarkably similar to where we're at right now. Red is not good. It's water stress and water scarce areas. Right now, about 3.3 billion people are in those water scarce and water stressed areas. 22% of the global GDP is in those red areas. It's projected to go up to 45% Again, not a good thing. Water quality is also important. 80% of all water discharged is untreated. That's a big deal. What are companies doing as a segue into our conversation with commercial opportunities here? Jason talked about water stewardship. That's really the term of art to describe how companies are mitigating risk and identifying business opportunities. They focus on conservation, preservation, engagement with stakeholders, and innovation, technology innovation. Fueling growth, I think leaders really focus on business growth as opposed to things like social license to operate and efficiency and reuse and so on. It's really the right side of the equation here in terms of maturity of companies, thinking about how to align their water stewardship strategies, having access to water to fuel business growth. Innovation and partnerships, I talked about this. This is really meant to illustrate that what is happening is that competitors are coming together in a pre-competitive space. Various industry sectors are coming together to tackle water scarcity and water quality issues. And that's a really exciting opportunity. Innovation and technologies, all sorts of technology opportunities. We'll hear about some of them today in the panel. Smart precision agriculture. You heard that 70% of water use is in the ag sector. It's not efficient, and it needs to be. So there's enough water to do every other thing that we need to use water for. But great progress there in terms of drip irrigation, reuse of water, and again, information communication technologies, desal, data analytics, the image in the lower left. So basically taking data and visualizing those data in a better way so we can make better public policy decisions and better commercial decisions in terms of driving economic and business growth and mitigating risk. The right side of the equation here is taking wastewater and treating it and putting it back into the system for potable and non-potable use. Toilet to tap is an unfortunate way to characterize it, but that's basically it. Singapore has done an amazing job in terms of rebranding that. At the lower right, it's bottled, treated water for potable use, and it's called New Water. So it's a little bit better than toilet to tap, and it's been very effective in Singapore. So that was my 10-minute presentation, and I think about 5 minutes. While you're reading the slide, I will call up the other panelists. This is my most important slide, by the way. It usually gets a joke, but it's after 5. I'm sorry. I would like to call up Michael Milligan, President and CEO of Axel Johnson, Inc., Paul Jeppesen, President and CEO of SKF USA, John Friedman, Global Government Affairs Leader, GE Power and Water, Mats Johansson, President and CEO of Skanska USA of Commercial Development. So gentlemen, let's sit down, have a quick chat, and then we'll go to the bar.
That's good.
Thanks. So I promise everyone will get out of here by 5:30, no later. Very sensitive to the time. So, I didn't get into, who you are, what your businesses are all about. So when you answer this question, if you can just tee up a little bit about that, what is your business all about? How does it relate to water? So we've been talking about water scarcity, the nexus of energy, water, and food. It's certainly a risk issue, but how is it translating into your company in terms of new business opportunities or managing risk, different dialogue with consumers and customers and so on? So what's your business in and how has this impacted what you're doing and what you're offering and maybe new products and services? So Mats, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Yeah, Skanska is a big construction and development company, mainly operation in Europe and here in the US. For us, we meet water very broadly, so to say. It's everything from being an infrastructure provider, meaning of upgrading, the infrastructure, the system, the water treatment plants, local ones or centralized ones. It's about doing buildings which consumes less water. We are investing in real estate, trying to convince tenants and others to, have this mindset and thoughts of investing long term. I always feel like some of the issues we always bump into, as a Scandinavian, I feel it's a little bit more here in the US, is that you want to think long term, but sometimes it's really hard to justify life cycle thinking, and that type of stuff in certain places in the US doesn't really in full scale exist yet, you know. But in some cases we could be successful, and we could take that into the equation when we do certain projects.
So you're seeing some progress in the US in terms of getting a longer term mindset, but also changing, you know, getting rid of some of the barriers that are sort of baked into commercial real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think US, I always say to my, you know, Swedish friends, European friends, that you have to see US as Europe, you know. It's so big differences where you are in the US. I really hate to say like, hey, this is the way it works in US. Depends on where you are. I think there are really islands in the US who are as progressive, even more progressive, and have long-term thinking than in the European way. But then there are also islands that doesn't really exist yet. But I think I see some progress, absolutely.
Okay, good. I'll come back to that. So, Mike.
So Axel Johnson Inc. is a private family holding company. We own a wide range of businesses, but we own 3 different companies that are all in one form or another engaged in providing products and services, solutions for treating, cleaning, providing clean water, municipal and industrial markets. So we've actually been in the water business for over 50 years. We believe strongly in the long-term character of providing services to that market. But I probably couldn't say it much better than you just did in respect to the difficulty that we've found over the years in getting people to think about long-term quality solutions to dealing with difficult problems. I would say that, interestingly enough, we're seeing more progress in that vein in the industrial markets today, where we actually have private sector buyers investing in capability and technology to make their businesses more effective. Ironically, where we see the most difficulty in getting people to think long-term is in the municipal markets, where decision-making is governed by political, short-term anxiety about budgets and accountability for budgets. And so you find municipalities increasingly making shorter-term decision-making around solutions that actually have incredibly important long-term effects. So I think there are some reasons to believe that the private sector is leading the right way over time, and we need to kind of get our government and municipal buyers to follow suit.
Okay, great. John?
Well, I'm with GE. We have 50,000 water customers in 130 countries, and we treat water and wastewater for communities and for businesses. I would say, Will, that we are seeing scarcity be a significant driver of growth for our water treatment business. We're the world's leader in water reuse technology. We have 1,000 water reuse plants around the world that are treating 1 billion gallons of water a day, so it can be reused for things like irrigation, for industrial cooling water, and even for drinking water. But we have, of these 50,000 customers, still only a relative handful that are reusing water, even in very water scarce areas, like the Middle East, like California here in the US. And we ask them why, and Will, what do they say? I'll answer.
Toilet to tap.
No, they say it's simply cheaper to take more water from the river or the ground, or even a potable municipal system where water, and I think you were kind of getting at this, is almost universally underpriced than it is, GE, to buy and implement your water reuse technologies. So I think we'll, from a society and a policy standpoint, we really have to find a way to help these communities and businesses around the world bridge the economic gap they're facing today for a sustainable future.
That was great, John.
Thank you.
You've said that before.
Maybe.
Okay, good. Paul, please.
Actually, John told me right up here before exactly what he said.
He practiced
Good at it.
Right, I get it.
SKF ball bearings. We're proud to be the largest ball bearing manufacturer in the world, headquartered in Gothenburg. And when you look at how has water impacted the SKF business in the past, actually in a positive way, because bearings and water doesn't go together. So every time there's water getting close to bearings, we may get a resale or so. But with the whole change here now, that SKF is really focused on how we can not only reduce our water consumption in our factories, in our locations, but also what we can do to help our customer base, 2 million of them worldwide, work much better with water and have a sustainable future.
Okay. So let's come back to why there's not a lot of traction around conservation and water reuse. John, you brought up the classic price versus value discussion, and we can run with that. But what are the other barriers to adoption of increased conservation, greater water efficiency, reuse, and recycling in both the public and private sector?
Yeah, I would say in our business, it's funny. I mean, in our business, you have always a building code, really regional or local, how we can do things and so on. And the code system is set up like every time there is a disaster or a problem, it will be changed. But it's never really progressive. So we bump into when we want to develop buildings or facilities, that we want to be progressive and do things, but we are not allowed to do it for the building code. And then it's just a huge hassle to get through that because the building code is never really, I know I'm criticizing, I'm not saying it's everywhere the same, but it's not really progressive in a way. It stops us sometimes to do what we want to do, as an example.
So this is not a technology issue, it is a public policy issue to a very large degree. I'll put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I definitely echo that. In fact, I would argue that, at least speaking from a North American perspective, one of the biggest barriers to innovation is the risk profile to operators associated with experimenting with new technology. So if you're a municipal plant operator in the US or you're an industrial operator and you want to go trial or pilot new filtration technology, you actually bear an enormous amount of risk because the regulatory environment in the US is a highly punitive environment. So if you make a mistake or if it doesn't go perfectly well, which parenthetically often happens when you're piloting new technology, the implication is typically, not only significant fines, but, some risk of maybe at best job loss, in some contexts, criminal prosecution. So the irony is if you go to Europe, Scandinavia in particular, you go around to municipal plants in particular, they're all piloting new technology. They're all willing to trial new things because at the end of the day, there's just not the same kind of, and it's not a place without regulatory scrutiny by any stretch.
Right.
But they have a different kind of approach to taking risk in that context.
So I was going to ask you, are there safe places to pilot technology that reduces any, litigation potential, basically manage that risk like any other risk? Is it piloting in other countries? Is it working through a water technology hub?
Yeah, places like Australia, Singapore, places where they've got tremendous demand and they know they've got to solve this problem today and where they're not faced with the reality that in many cases, even here in the United States, the relative cost of doing the easy thing is not higher. New Zealand, by the way, I think New Zealand is the last free enterprise country in the world, so we can all go there and try.
So you can pilot elsewhere and it's easier to bring it back here to scale.
It's not so, the difficulty is, again, you got to get municipal customers to believe that the risk profile isn't that high. So you got to pilot for a long time other places. Average time frame for adopting new technology in a U.S. municipal water or wastewater treatment plant is over 15 years.
Yeah, that's not acceptable.
It's a problem.
Right.
Well, I'm going to say something new. I actually, just picking up on my colleague, I think the fundamental problem is there is a lack of clear standards. So let's say you are a poultry processing company. You want to treat the wastewater from your plant so you can reuse it to wash the poultry. But you don't know if you can do that without being prosecuted for breaking the law. And if you look in the US, and there's different situations in different countries, but there are no federal standards for water reuse, what level of treatment is required for what level of use. At the state level, 50 states, 25 have regulations that are all over the map, 16 have guidelines that are not binding, and 9 have nothing at all. So it's kind of a mess, and it does make it hard for communities and for businesses to go with innovative technologies.
So Paul, what are you seeing in your company in terms of adopting innovative technologies? I mean, what we're hearing is that in the industrial, the private sector, it's easier than it is if you're trying to sell into the public sector municipal market. So how easy is it for you to drive innovation?
I would say we have had a fantastic leadership over the recent years, and we adopted the LEED standards. and which is primarily for the buildings and structure and so on, and not really into the manufacturing processes. But because of being a sustainable company and the drive from our leadership, we developed our own sustainable factory rating. So we go out and rate our factories on how they do from a sustainability perspective, and water is a part of that. Mm-hmm. We don't use much water in our manufacturing processes, basically only for cooling, and we actually recycle that via filtrations and so on. So the opportunity for us to really contribute here is with our customer base.
Okay. I want to go back to the difference between the industrial and the public sector markets, because I think that's a big issue. So it strikes me that in the private sector, if there's business disruption, that turns into real money, and that'll drive technology adoption and taking some level of risk. And in the US, we're beginning to see water scarcity impact economic development, California being ground zero, essentially. So in your view, is that part of the driver here, that needs to happen in a more profound way for state agencies and water treatment, water utilities adopting technologies? Does that play into the equation at all?
I mean, I guess been pushed from all directions if something should happening. I mean, you're talking about the public policies contra the private sector. I mean, there is a huge responsibility from the public policies too, you know, to see that things. We can't have these nice visions and say that the market will solve everything, you know. Right. It doesn't work.
John? Well, I actually think that this is a case where communities or cities are ahead of industry. If you go to almost any city, go in California, say, they have a 1, a 5, a 10, a 20-year plan on where their supply of water, how they're going to source the supply of water for their growing needs. They think about this stuff, they implement solutions, they plan ahead. And that's why in California, in the 4th year of its worst drought in the past 500 years, they're doing pretty well in Southern California, if you think about it. They planned, they did a great job. From a business standpoint, in the absence of a corporate sustainability program like we've heard about here, I think it's very hard to get business to invest in water reuse technologies in the absence of absolute scarcity.
Okay, so that's the contrarian view.
That's the contrarian.
Maybe. Okay. So take a different path here. What are you seeing in the way of innovative technologies in terms of efficiency and reuse and recycling? What's out there that promising, interesting, that might tackle some of the big issues that you're seeing? Nanomembranes, what? Data?
The first thing I'd say is that some of the most promising capability to make big strides in improving the utilization of water and the efficiency of water is not foundationally new science. It's actually just system assembly into solutions that use a lot of existing technology in an organized fashion. You had the slide up there with toilet to tap, right? There's almost nothing that's meaningful new science that makes that possible. It's perfectly available today, and it's really about figuring out how to assemble those kinds of capabilities and solutions that are cost effective, for places where it's not a function of there just isn't another drop of water left. And then there's, of course, the challenge associated with getting people to get comfortable with the reality of that circumstance. But,
so if we froze technology and just tackled price, value, public policy, we'd get further.
I think a lot of the capabilities are there. That's right.
I think what we're challenged with is that people look at cost on the component itself and not total cost. Because when you add value, you may have to charge more, but at the end of the day, there is a return on that investment. And people are, because of the pressure, because of us here, that wants a good return on the investment as a shareholder, whatever it is, the greed comes up again. We heard it several times today. I actually would suggest to Renee to take this on a roadshow here, because this is something that really opened up your eyes when we listen to all these different aspects of this, in the kitchen, in the factories, in the buildings, and so on. Awareness, awareness, awareness. And then I think we need some incentives. we do a lot. We can make draw a parallel to renewable energy. Wind turbines is big business for us, for GE I know as well. And that can only happen via some incentives from the government.
So part of those incentives, green building movement, sustainable development, you're seeing that change the equation a bit with respect to water?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we're doing some, I mean, the most progressive on the West Coast at the moment is living buildings where you have net zero water use, for example.
Right.
And you do this more, how to say, call it upstream or downstream or centralized, decentralized solutions and are, you know, taking care of water, collect water, treat water and everything. And I mean, it starts happening, but again, it comes back to what we started with, that there are some pioneers out there, and you can see that, you know, the long-term value of that, and not just see it right now, here and now. Then it could work out. So I have big hopes.
You can't do this unless you have hope.
Exactly.
Right. So how much do you push on the public policy, regulatory side of the equation here to get that dialogue around price, value, changing building codes, whatever it may be, adoption in municipal plants? Is that part of your strategy to have that conversation?
I would say for SKF, globally speaking, sustainability is the driver for us. We want, as the leader in the industry, you have to go out there and then pull along. It's just an obligation that comes with being a leader, I think. Hopefully you'll get some along with you, but I think it's just one small ingredient of this whole awareness campaign that we need to do. I'll give you a good example. We saw this morning Mark was showing that the lowest consumption of water was in Denmark and also the highest priced. 2 weeks ago, I had my 85-year-old mother visiting here. And when I noticed sitting next to the bathroom she was in, when she took a shower, she turned on the water, got wet, closed the water again, and used soap, turned on the water again. He did that 3 times. And I went in and talked to her and said, is something wrong with the water? No, she said. So fundamentally, why does she do that? Well, perhaps because of the generation, but also because of the incentive. If you don't spend that much water or use that much water, it's less expensive for you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I hate to dwell on this point because I know you'd say that everybody gets tired of the value to cost discussion, but when you really put it in perspective, you know, the average house in America, including in California, pays about $550 a year for their water. The average household in America pays roughly, you know, $1,200 a year for their cable television,
right,
so they can watch the Kardashians. They pay $2,500 a year for their cell phone and their data service so that they can research the fact that when the water runs out, they're going to die. So there's at some fundamental level, you know, just forget, you know, putting a premium on the price of water. We just charged what it actually cost. We'd triple the cost that we're charging the average household today.
Yeah, most people know what they pay for cable TV. They have no clue what they pay for water, although that's changing ever so slowly. So the price signal driver in all this. John?
So, Will, in the long run, water prices will go up. They are going up. Saudi Arabia just announced last week that it's going to double its tariff for industrial water. That is going to drive more water reuse in Saudi Arabia. But in the near term, policy is game, set, match, because you need incentives to help bridge that economic gap that I mentioned earlier. And you need to remove barriers like a lack of clear standards so people can actually implement new technologies. And it's all policy. By the way, new technologies are constantly bringing down the cost, the upfront capital cost and the operating costs of these technologies, and that'll help too. But near term, it's policy.
Okay. So I do want to wrap it up. I'll ask 2 more questions. One is, you know, everyone shows these great maps of what the world could look like in 2025 and 2050, and it's hardly promising. Where do you really think we're going to be, like 2030? Just, you know, we're really going to improve in terms of efficiency and reuse? Public policy changes in places like California will catch up with reality? What's your take? I mean, this ties to your business strategy and really all of yours, essentially.
I mean, I just think how humans works. We need some couple of crises more to wake up, unfortunately.
So you don't think what's happening in California is enough of a crisis?
Honestly, I think we need more.
I don't think it is either, by the way. So.
I think we need much more, but it's sad to say like that, but that's just how humanity works, you know. I think we will see something different in 2030, but it's, you know, we always need to be shaken up to realize things in a broader scale that we need to change behavior.
So if you turn on the tap and nothing comes out, that might be enough of a trigger. No, I mean, really, that happens in many parts of the world, so that might move the needle in California.
Yeah, I think it'll be a highly localized phenomenon. I mean, the reality is there's one kind of problem in California and there's no kind of problem in Minnesota. It's just not the same kind of problem. And so I think we're going to see a highly localized evolution in the map where places where it really is scarce and where it really is difficult to transport clean water to those environments are going to make great strides, and the market's going to work in that fashion. In some regards, you know, the other side of public policy is also getting out of the way. It's letting the market work.
Okay. Paul?
Again, I really think awareness is big in this. I think innovation is critical, because when I look at the opportunity, and I hope I have the numbers correct, but 2 to 3% of the available water out there is drinking water. The rest is not. We gotta deal with that big mountain there and make sure that we can turn that into drinking water. Doesn't help, and it doesn't mean we can just waste water at all. No, and not at all. It's a combination of the two. But I think innovation, we have to pour money into innovation and really get that, and scale, in my view.
Don?
Well, we're going to be fine in 2030. Anders knows that. Water Resources 2030 group. But the world has so many resources, wastewater being one of them. The world is using 3% of its wastewater today. Even in California, in the midst of this terrible drought, we're using 6 to 8%. You can meet all your needs. There's no issue. It's dollars.
John, it's not a drought. You were not paying attention when I said that.
What'd you say?
I said, let's stop calling it a drought.
What is it?
It's water scarcity.
Okay.
Yeah, climate change, things that we can't talk about.
I wasn't paying attention.
So I apologize for cutting the panel short, but I'll end on one opportunity here. Is there anything I didn't ask, something you'd like to comment on about the intersection of energy, water, and food, your personal perspective? So we're done.
Good.
Say, Anders, you are now up. So first of all, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Round of applause.
I've never been.
May I just thank the panel for your excellent participation and for your patience with the timing, and also I would like to thank Skanska and Axel Johnson for partnering with us today. I would also once again like to thank our platinum partner Deloitte, and especially Will Sarney, our moderator for this panel. Will has been a tremendous asset to us behind the scenes in putting this program together today. So thank you very much, Will, for all your help during the planning process. And also, again, a warm thank you to Andreas, our other partner from Deloitte here today, for all your work with the Green Summit Award. Thank you so much. And now I'm very pleased to call on Anders Bertell again. Anders was, as you may remember, one of our moderators from this morning, and he has kindly promised to give us the concluding remarks. So please, Anders.
Thank you, Renee, for the opportunity, and thanks to all of you who have stayed until the very end of this fascinating event. This has been a real fantastic day and also previous evening, full of challenges, full of inspiration, full of innovative ideas and solutions, and loaded with a lot of enthusiasm. It started last night with a bigger picture in double sense. Matthias Klum very eloquently made us realize the necessity for us all to protect and maintain the critical ecosystems of our world, not just because they are beautiful, but because they perform so many different functions for the survival and functioning of our planet, and thereby also for ourselves and our economies. Today we've been more granular in our approach, looking at this from different perspectives, starting with the presentation on the Arctic and the challenges that region is facing as a result of climate change, and the need to maintain the function of Arctic as a refrigerator for our planet, not just because the polar bear cubs are extremely cute. Then we moved on to the county of Norrbotten, presenting the beauty and abundance of natural resources that county has, but also how it is developing into the future, and how it also draws upon the science and research in the region and how they can be part of the journey. And then I came to think of the development that Norrbotten and northern parts of Sweden has gone through over the centuries, in particular in the light of the challenges that Matthias Klum put to us yesterday. Last night we also listened to the beautiful music and singing, joiking of the Sami people, historically nomadic reindeer herders up north in Sweden. And many of them, I believe, would have a very interesting story to tell about how their life and the environment that they depend on has been changed over the centuries as a result of the exploitation of minerals, hydropower, and forests in what they see as their land. At the same time, those resources, the minerals, the water, and the forest, were the basis for Sweden's economic development. In 1870, people in Sweden were starving, leaving their country and moving to this country. In major cities in Europe, people were actually collecting money for the poor and starving Swedes. So we need to find ways of exploring those resources, but to do it in a sustainable way. Some of those hydropower dams should maybe never have been built because we lost a lot of fish species that now even has effects on the fisheries in the Baltic Sea. Some wetlands should never have been drained because they were also, as mentioned earlier here today, very good at cleaning the water in the rivers. And some of the forests maybe not should have been cut down because they were also contributing to the climate that we have. But some of that would still happen today because we do need those resources. So what we need to do now, I think, in the implementation of the SDGs and in the linkages between all the various SDGs, not only the water SDG, is to take them to the local level. So combine it with the thinking around the growth within the planetary boundaries that Matthias was referring to, and think through at the local, regional, national level, what are the critical ecosystems that we need to preserve or sometimes even restore in order for our environment to function as it should, so that we can benefit from that in the future. And not all countries need to follow the same path for development that Sweden and US and many other countries has gone through, with unsustainable exploitation or even destruction of natural resources, and thereafter a long phase of cleaning up the mess. The rest of this day, I think, has been a fantastic display of how we can leapfrog development in a sustainable way. Innovations and solutions that, if scaled up and replicated, and sometimes adapted to the context of developing countries, could make a huge difference. We've seen that in water, in food production, food manufacturing, and so on. And this also emphasizes the strong interlinkages between many of the SDGs, as has been discussed here today, and in particular within the water, food, energy, climate change nexus. Finally, I would like to come back to the title of today's Green Summit, Money Down the Drain, or Revenue Stream of the Future, which I think our panel here discussed in a very inspiring way. I just read a book that presents the history of Israel's development of water solutions. Let There Be Water. It was recently reviewed in New York Times. And there might be many views on the politics in the region and the relationship between Israel and its neighbors, and I'm not commenting on that at all, just on the development of technical solutions. And it all started in the 1930s during the so-called British Mandate for Palestine. British put a cap on the migration to Palestine by Jews based on the availability of water, and used that as a way of limiting the immigration because they were afraid of destabilization in the region. They had the Suez Canal to care about. So the Zionist movement at that time wanted to prove the British were wrong, that there was more water available and that more people could move to Palestine. So they came up with the idea of a north-south water carrier, and with that combined the idea of and the vision of turning the Negev desert into arable land, a blooming oasis. That proved to be a rather expensive solution. So they were looking for other ways of getting water, and thereby searched for groundwater in the south. And that made them eventually to become a leader in groundwater exploration and abstraction. The next phase was on wastewater, where they saw that they were wasting a lot of resources, valuable resources that could be used. So they came up with the idea of reusing, recycling wastewater, cleaning it, treating it to the appropriate level, etc. And they became world leaders in that. 85% of wastewater is recycled in Israel today. Next phase was drip irrigation, making agriculture use less water. And they became world leaders in that. They also started to develop salt-tolerant plants using brackish water, who also happened to be sweeter and more attractive to the customers. And finally, also on desalination, that they have been the innovative leaders on, which also has become a major industry. So not only are they self-sustained when it comes to water availability, also a very high quality, it's also become one of the most important export income generating businesses for Israel. So I do believe that indeed we can turn this into a very profitable revenue stream for the future as well. With that, I thank you, and I thank in particular SAC New York and René for taking the initiative, and all the staff for doing this in such a very successful way.